How's this for the plot of a great Canadian novel? A young man grows up on a native reserve in northern Ontario with 11 brothers and sisters and no running water. He builds his own outdoor rink every winter and dreams of playing in the National Hockey League. And he makes it, first as a player, then as a coach. After coaching his team to a Stanley Cup victory, he becomes Grand Chief of the Assembly of First Nations and then Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, only part of that story has come true so far for Ted Nolan. He has yet to win the Stanley Cup, and his political ambitions are on hold until he does. Ted Nolan is an Ojibwe from Northern Ontario, and he is the reigning NHL Coach of the Year. But a contract dispute with the Buffalo Sabres has left the Coach of the Year without a team. And as he waits for his next chance to coach in the big leagues, Nolan is spending time with his family back home and with a native community that adores him.
How's this for the plot of a great Canadian novel? A young man grows up on a native reserve in northern Ontario with 11 brothers and sisters and no running water. He builds his own outdoor rink every winter and dreams of playing in the National Hockey League. And he makes it, first as a player, then as a coach. After coaching his team to a Stanley Cup victory, he becomes Grand Chief of the Assembly of First Nations and then Prime Minister of Canada.
Well, only part of that story has come true so far for Ted Nolan. He has yet to win the Stanley Cup, and his political ambitions are on hold until he does. Ted Nolan is an Ojibwe from Northern Ontario, and he is the reigning NHL Coach of the Year. But a contract dispute with the Buffalo Sabres has left the Coach of the Year without a team. And as he waits for his next chance to coach in the big leagues, Nolan is spending time with his family back home and with a native community that adores him.
On a railway bed, they put down all kinds of rock. They take away the good soil. They pour oil over it, and they run a train over it. And somehow, through all of that, a determined piece of blade of grass sometimes appears. And that's how I see Ted.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great dignity and respect I introduce to you Mr. Ted Nolan.
How, Miigwech. I was born and raised on the Garden River First Nations outside of Sault Ste. Marie here, and growing up in Garden River was a very big inspiration to me. I really enjoyed growing up on a First Nation reserve, and from a very loving family. I had 6 brothers and 5 sisters, and growing up on reserve, I had a great opportunity to take part in our cultural aspect of our life. I was an Indian dance until I was, 16 or 17 years of age, and until this hockey stuff got my way, and I started pursuing that.
It's obvious the roles hockey has played in your life recently, but I want to go back to what it did for you in the beginning. Tell us about the role of the hockey culture growing up on a reserve outside Sault Ste. Marie.
Well, I think, I've always stated from day one that hockey's been a big part of my life, and speaking to youth organizations and gatherings like this weekend is something that I've always maintained, and ever since I was a little kid about hockey. We didn't have any indoor plumbing, so I made my rink in the backyard 1 pail at a time. Run, fill up the pail, go back, fill it up, and make a rink, and throughout that whole time, and that's why I try to get a message across to the kids. One step at a time, you'll achieve any goal that you want.
Now, when you were kids growing up, where did you actually carry all the buckets out to actually build that homemade rink?
The pump was probably right at the corner of this house. This is my sister's. This is all like where we grew up. The old house used to be right here, and right underneath the kitchen window is right here, basically right here. And we used to make the rink and the pump and freezing our.
And you literally bucket by bucket by bucket, built
by
the thing.
bucket by bucket by bucket by bucket. We used to get some real intense games and stuff like that, and used to be like our older brother Joe was a little bit of a sadistic soul, you know, and he used to love the idea of, you know, egging everybody on to get into some extracurricular activities and stuff like that. And he made the rule. It was him. He says, anybody who bleeds, there's no whining, no crying or anything like that. You have to make the red line, so we have to have an idea of where half the ice is going to say. So, but he was a funny guy.
First one to bleed makes the red line.
First one to bleed makes the red line. So
It's great.
yeah, it's a classic.
I heard a story about you guys. You got to tell me if this is true. The story I heard was that you came from such modest means that when you both went out to play hockey, you couldn't play on the same line because you used to share a stick and equipment.
Yeah.
And you'd exchange it in between shifts. That's a true story?
That's like we used to pick up our sticks at we used to have Sunny Sunoco just in the city. We used to give away sticks every time we put in whatever $2 worth of gas or whatever the case may be. And so that's where we picked up our sticks. The helmets, the gloves, we used to share at every shift. So after about the first 1 or 2 games, the coach would figure, so well, Ted was a little bit more gifted in the skating department, and in that way, he says, we want to be goaltender.
Said to you, we want to be goalie.
Yeah, so I said, sure, I'll be a goalie, and, because the equipment was supplied. So Ted got to wear the stuff, and I got the goaltender stuff, and I've been a goaltender ever since.
I didn't really classify the growing up on reserve any negativism whatsoever. I had the best childhood anybody could ever ask for. Certainly we didn't have the money and all the fancy stuff, but certainly we had a lot of love and support. Both my uncles were alcoholics, and I had to go to their house when I bet you 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 with my mother to help drive them over after the shakes and the DTs that they have, and see them with the dry heaves and how sick they really were, and all of a sudden you hear the stories of some of our elders, how many injustices that were done, and through all this whole time, I never once I felt sorry for them or I felt bad for them. I just felt they had a bad hand in life. There's a lot of trees that were broken, a lot of mistrusts out there, there's a lot of prejudice out there, and I told myself from that point on, when I get to be a man, it's not going to be the same for me. I'm going to try to make a difference. I'm going to try to change things. That I did experiment with drinking and what have you. And there's one party we went to, and one of the guys at the party, he was an elderly guy at the time, and he said, you know, if you want to be good at something, you want to be a good drunk, drink good. You have to learn how to drink long and hard. And once he said that, I said to myself, you know, that's the same trail I'm getting myself into as everybody else. A lot of people have taken that wrong path. So right then and there, I said the same for me, and so I changed. I never really met with so much racism and prejudice until I left home when I was 16. I went to a small community up in northern Ontario, and I'll tell you what, I'd never seen anything like it before. My brothers come to the town, and they see me play the first weekend, and they almost dragged me in a car and said, come on back home with us.
So we get him after the game. He says, listen, I want you to pack your stuff up and come back with us. We're still friends. You can fit in there. We'll throw your stuff in the trunk and all this thing. He says, well, if I do it now, I'll do it forever. So he stuck it out.
And, you know, hear things like that, you know, get back to welfare line, you know, get drunk and all those things. And
Guys would say this to you in the middle of the game?
Yeah, you know, hear it in fans from the stands. And I mean, this is when you're 16 years old, 15 years old, still you're so naive to the things out there in the real world, and all of a sudden it hits you square in the face like it never did anything ever hit me before. So that was real shocking to me, but I managed to make it through. I persevered. I took it and let it go in 1 year, right out the other year. And I think the fact that helped me do that was how proud I am to be an Aboriginal person and a First Nations person.
He sees his medicine man on a regular basis, and this is where he kind of dreams. Sits around and thinks, you know. So.
What kinds of things would come to him in a place like this?
He does a lot of stuff, you know, like, I think he's like our parents, you know, especially our mother. Like, she's just continually around and doing things within his life. So I think he just spends a lot of time here just reflecting, looking back and wondering what the big world holds.
You lost your parents way earlier in life than you should have. Your father through his health and your mother through a car accident because of a drunk driver. You know, in a family of 12 kids, not to have their parents around, that must be just awful. What was that like?
Well, like I said, it's, you know, when people look at Ted Nolan staying behind a bench now, you know, there's a lot of struggles involved. You know, not only going through racism and name calling and stuff, but when you lose your parents, I mean, that's tough. And, I lost my father the year before I went to Kenora, Ontario, and you know, that was a real tough thing to take because he was, you know, he's a very stern man. He was very disciplinarian, and he always told us to fight for what we believed in and never quit. And throughout those times in Kenora, you know, certainly you would love some fatherly advice and call back and say, he was shout up their rear and keep going. So it was nice to have those memories, and certainly it's awful for him not being around. And all of a sudden in '81, my mother was killed by a tragic drunk driving accident, which is another devastating blow. So I feel him on a daily basis, and I get a special seat for him every hockey game. So you know, it's tough to talk about. It's tough to deal with. You know, that's part of life, and I know they're definitely here in spirit.
We were having a roast for Ted, and also to honor Ted's achievements after he won the Memorial Cup. And I was honored to be one of the people asked to speak. And I've always been a person very conscious of time and time frames. And 5 minutes before it started, I'm looking around and I don't see Ted. And so I asked Sandra, I said, well, where's Ted? And she said, well, he'll be back soon. I said, but I persisted, and I said, well, where is he? And she said, he's gone to thank his parents.
At the cemetery?
At the cemetery, yeah. And I had a hard time not crying.
As a player, did he have skill?
He knew his limitations and how to work within them, and whatever his limitations were, he wanted to be the best at, and certainly that's what he was.
But from what I heard, he wasn't the guy who had the best shot, or he couldn't skate the fastest or anything like that. He was just tough, eh? He was a tough guy.
He was a role player, and he did what he did best.
Which was?
His role.
You're allowed to say he was a good fighter.
No. He was a good role player.
He was a good role player.
I definitely worked at my craft when I was growing up. Maybe not the most skilled with passing and shooting, what have you, but